For my father, whom I love very much and has supported me in every endeavor. Happy Father's Day. Monday, June 24th. Well, I went into the research business today. It was simpler than I thought it would be. All it took was a can of paint, and now I've got somebody who wants to be a painter and is willing to contribute something to the business. I haven't made any money yet, but even in the research business, I imagine it takes a day or so to get rolling. At breakfast this morning, I asked Uncle Al if it would be all right if I used the barn on the vacant lot down the road. Of course it'll be all right, he said. It's your barn, or rather it belongs to your mother. Uncle Al had gone to the office. I asked Aunt Mabel for a can of paint and a brush. She rummaged around down in the basement and found a good-sized can of white paint, which she gave me without even asking what I wanted it for. Uncle Al has one of those lightweight magnesium ladders in his garage, which I carried down to the lot. I set it up against the end of the barn facing the road. I climbed up and marked off some lines for my sign. I'm pretty good at most subjects in school, but the thing I'm probably best at is art. My art teacher keeps telling me that I should be a professional artist when I grow up. If I decide not to be a naturalist, maybe I will be. As it is, maybe I'll draw bugs and birds and things like that. Anyhow, I like making things like signs, and I'm pretty good at it, if I do say so myself. I measured off the lines very carefully and roughed it in the letters of my sign with a carpenter's pencil. When I had everything spaced out, I began to paint. On the top line in letters about 2 feet high, I put Henry Reed, Inc. Then I moved down several feet, marked off 2 more lines, and penciled in the word research. I got the paint and had started back up the ladder when a voice said, "What kind of research?" I looked around, and there, standing below me, with a butterfly net in her hand, was a little scrawny girl. She was wearing a pair of faded blue jeans, a blue and white checkered shirt, and red sneakers. She had brown hair, which was faded in spots from the sun, and was drawn back in a sort of ponytail. She had a small face which was covered with freckles and light blue eyes that didn't miss a thing. She was nibbling on an apple like a little rabbit. If she hadn't had such sharp-pointed nose, she would have looked like a rabbit too. "Who are you?" I asked. "Margaret Glass," she answered. "Everybody calls me Midge, and don't make any remarks about my being a little glass, or that I'd better watch out or I'll get broken, because I've heard them all." She took another bite of the apple and said, "Who are you?" "That's me," I said, pointing to the sign up above my head. "Henry Reed, Inc.," she said aloud. "You don't look incorporated." Then she went off into gales of laughter. I saw right away that I had a crazy giggling girl to deal with. Her remark didn't make any sense at all, but she seemed to think it was funny. However, I didn't say anything because I had already figured out that she was the girl that my Aunt Mabel had mentioned. Since she was the only person near my age in town, there was no use getting off on the wrong foot. My father, who is a pretty smart diplomat, says that if you have to get along with people, you might as well start right out in the beginning to try and like them. I was willing to try with this little apple eater, but it didn't look promising. "How old are you?" I asked. 12, she replied. I thought she was even younger than that because she was so small, but when you're 12, you're just a kid, not even in your teens, and that explains a lot. Kids that are not even in their teens are apt to being a little childish. I've been in my teens for more than a year, which makes a lot of difference. "What kind of research are you going to do?" she asked. "Any kind of research that people want done," I replied. "Pure or applied research?" she asked. "What's the difference?" "Well, in pure research, you just sort of try and find out things because you're curious. In applied research, you're trying to find the answer to some question. Is that clear?" "Not very," I replied. "All right. Suppose I have a rabbit, and I try feeding him a lot of different kinds of things just because I want to know what all a rabbit will eat. That's pure research. If somebody hires me to find out what the rabbits eat and will grow best on because he wants to sell rabbit food, that's applied research." "I'm going to do both," I told her. "Pure research for myself and applied research if anybody will pay me some money." "That's sensible," Midge said. "You ought to put that in your sign." "How does it happen you know so much about research?" "My father is a research chemist." She finished her apple and threw the core over there into the grass. I was still up on the ladder. I drew the lines a little bit longer and started roughing out the letters to make the words "Pure and Applied Research." I worked for several minutes and Midge didn't say a word. "I might join your firm," she said finally, "if you invited me nicely." "Why should I?" "Teamwork," she answered. "Teamwork's the thing these days in research. My father says things have gotten so complicated that one man alone can't discover much anymore. I thought this over for a minute while I kept working on my sign. If her father was a research chemist, like she said, she probably knew quite a bit about how research organizations work, and also with the whole summer ahead of me, I figured it might be nice to have someone to talk to, even if it was a girl a year and a half younger than I. I turned around and sat down on the ladder. What are you going to put into the business? I asked. I've got the property here, the building, a lot of pigeons which are inside, and one turtle. I waved my hand at the half-finished sign, which was pretty good. I'm even furnishing the sign. I'll furnish brains, she said. Even though I always try to be polite, I laughed out loud at that, but she didn't seem to mind. Brains are the most important part of any research organization. My father says so. He's probably right, I admitted. But the question is, who has them? What grade are you in? 7th, she replied. There you are, I said. I'm in the 8th grade, so I've had more education. I've had more experience, too. I'm a teenager, and you're only 12. That's no advantage, she said. Who are all these delinquent children you read about in the papers? Teenagers, that's you. Me? I'm not a teenager, so I must be a respectable, law-abiding citizen. She started laughing like an idiot again. I don't know what about, since her remark didn't even make any sense. I climbed down the ladder and put my can of paint and brush on a box. I sharpened my pencil and started toward the ladder again. I could also contribute a pair of rabbits, she said. We could raise rabbits, and they use lots of rabbits in research to test serum and drugs and feeds and things like that. I thought this over for a minute. Never had rabbits, because we never lived any place where there was room enough. What kind of rabbits? I asked. Checkered giants, Midge replied. They're great big white rabbits with black spots. That might not be a bad idea, I said. Should have a few rabbits. You could just make that Reed and glass ink, she said, pointing at my sign. I just finished painting the words Henry Reed, and I didn't care much for the idea of changing my sign before it was half finished. Let's see the rabbits first, I suggested. She led the way across the street to a big white frame house which sat still back from the road. She went around to the house to the back, past a little sunken stone wall garden, and through a hedge to a small barn that we used for a garage. Besides this sat a little portable wire pen. Attached to one end of the pen was a tiny wooden house with a tar paper roof. Only one rabbit was in sight. It was out in the pen, nibbling away at part of a carrot. That's Matilda, Midge said. Matilda was an enormous rabbit. There was a small wire gate on top of the pen. I opened this, reached in, and picked her up. She weighed at least 7 or 8 pounds and was strong and wiry as a wildcat. The minute I lifted her off the ground, she started kicking like a mule, and about the 3rd or 4th kick, she made several deep scratches in my wrist. I let her drop down in the pen. She seemed healthy, all right. I leaned down and tried to look in the little house, but it was too dark inside to see anything. How do you get him to come out of the house? I asked. Oh, Jedediah is not in the house, Midge explained. He's over by your barn. By my barn? Yes, he got loose and I was trying to catch him. That's how I happened to be over there. Look, we can chase Matilda into the house and slide the little door shut. Then you can detach the house from the pen and we can haul them over there on the wagon. We're going to keep everything at the research center, aren't we? Just a minute. The agreement was for 2 rabbits, I said, not 1. Well, I've got 2 rabbits. All we have to do is catch the other one. All right. When we catch the other one, I'll paint your name on the barn, I said. Until we do catch him, it's going to stay Henry Reed, Inc. Okay, Midge agreed. It's a temporary partnership until we catch Jedediah. But you have to help me catch him. It shouldn't be too difficult to catch a rabbit, I said. No, it shouldn't. All you have to do is be smarter than the rabbit. She thought that was funny and started laughing again, but I didn't even smile. If one expects to be the head of a successful business, he has to be dignified. We got Midge's wagon and carted the pen over on the first trip and the house with the rabbit inside on the second. Then we went back for the 2 crocks that she used for food and water, and for a big pail full of rabbit food that looked like tiny little dog biscuits. While Midge got the rabbit pen all set up, I went back to the sign. I finished painting the words Pure and Applied Research, and then climbed down from the ladder. That looks pretty good, Midge said approvingly. Are you going to say anything else? Maybe later, when I figure out something to say. Now let's catch that other rabbit. Did you see where he went? When I first came over here, he was back there by that old lilac bush, Midge said, pointing. He's probably still around there somewhere. Agony had been trotting back and forth with us as we brought over the rabbit in the pen. He got sort of excited when he first saw the rabbit, but after he'd made about 25 circuits around the wire pen and saw that he couldn't possibly get in, He gave up in disgust. However, since he was a rabbit dog, I figured that he would probably take off if he saw a loose rabbit and chase it into the next country. I had his leash in my pocket, so I tied him up to the corner of the barn, which he didn't like very much, and then Midge and I went over to the lilac bush. We hunted for about 5 minutes, and then I stopped, the rabbit sitting calmly in a sort of half nest in the tall grass, watching us, chewing away contentedly. "Let me have the net," I said to Midge. We sneaked around in back of the rabbit and crept up very quietly and slowly. Finally, just when I was within 3 feet of him, he gave a hop forward. I made a lunge and missed him by about 3 inches. That was bad enough, but the rabbit wasn't scared at all. He hopped off lazily toward the trees as if he wasn't really worried about our catching him. "I almost had him," I said. Midge shook her head. "He always lets you get within a few inches of him. I think he likes to tease people." "How long has this rabbit been loose?" I asked suspiciously. "Oh, about 6 weeks," Midge replied. "6 weeks?" I yelled. "Why, he's practically a wild rabbit." "No, he isn't. Wild rabbits are brown." "You know what I mean," I said disgustedly. "That's not very honest, buying your way into a farm with 2 rabbits, one of which you can't catch." "I probably could have caught him," Midge explained, "if it hadn't been for the apples." "What apples?" I asked. "The sour apples," Midge replied. "They're the people that live in that red brick house next door to your lot here. They're spiteful and ornery." "What's that got to do with the rabbit?" "Well, the rabbit has been over here most of the time since the day he got loose. There's a little brook at the back of your place, and I suppose he gets water there. And of course there's plenty of grass and things to eat. I've been over here dozens of times trying to catch him, but every time I start chasing him, he hops through the hedge onto the apple's property. Mr. Apple won't let anyone put a foot on his land. He starts yelling and threatening the minute you get near. Once I chased the rabbit all around his garage, and he complained to my mother. He kicked up an awful fuss, and so Mother has forbidden me to even go near their place." "Why is he so ornery?" I asked. "I don't know," Midge replied. "Maybe he's just naturally mean, or maybe he's trying to hide something. I wouldn't be surprised if he had a whole lot of bodies buried there. That would be a good research project. Find out who's murdered or what he's hiding." "Let's get the rabbit first," I said. We hunted until lunchtime, and we saw the rabbit only twice. I got near enough to try catching him with the net again, and he did exactly the same thing. He made a lazy hop just in time to avoid being caught. I got more and more annoyed at that rabbit, and Midge didn't help anything by saying that maybe the rabbit had more brains than our whole research organization. After lunch, I decided that maybe we were going about the whole thing wrong, and that the right approach was to let Agony do what he was supposed to do: chase rabbits. Uncle Al came home for lunch, and I asked him about it, and he said that a well-trained bugle hound would chase a rabbit around in a circle so the hunter could get a shot. I figured that if Agony could chase the rabbit around in circles, I might get a chance to land him with a net as he went by. And, if I didn't, in time he should get tired out. I figured that a big, fat, tame rabbit shouldn't be able to run nearly as fast as a wild one. I thought Midge might worry for fear Agony would catch the rabbit and kill it, but she didn't seem to mind. We started with Agony on a leash, working back and forth through the grass near where we had last seen Jedediah. Agony seemed to enjoy his work and went sniffing around as happily as could be. We hadn't been hunting for more than 5 minutes when he let out a bay that sounded like a woman yodeling. Uncle Al had said that when a beagle was after rabbit, he had a bay that beagle owners claimed was beautiful and musical. But that some people, himself included, thought it sounded like a woman being murdered. After I got over being surprised, I thought Agony had a beautiful voice, but Midge stuck her fingers in her ears. Whether Agony's voice was beautiful or not, it certainly scared that rabbit. He didn't do any lazy hopping this time, but took off like a streak. Agony nearly choked himself to death trying to get away to chase him. "He's headed straight for Mr. Apple's place," Midge said. "He knows he's safe there." With Agony half pulling me, we followed the rabbit with his nose to the ground. Agony sniffed along through the grass and leaves, straining and struggling to get away and go after Jedediah. He led us through the edge of the woods and up to a tall pivot hedge. The rabbit must have gone through this because Agony stood sniffing at it, anxious to go through after him. When you stand up close to the hedge, you can see through without any difficulty. The Apple's house is a great big red brick building that sits cold and ugly in the middle of a big green lawn. "That is a French provincial chateau," Midge said. "I know because Mrs. Apple told my mother that it was. They're quite proud of it." The house does look something like a French chateau. It has a steep pitched slate roof and about 6 chimneys. A lot of French chateaux are ugly, I said, but I never saw one quite as ugly as that. Have you ever been to France? Midge asked. Sure, I said. France, Italy, England, Austria, Switzerland. She looked at me, round-eyed. I guess that made quite an impression. It's funny, the things that will impress girls. I didn't tell her that I'd never been to Florida or Maine or even Philadelphia, or a lot of places like that. There was no use in going into details, and besides, I thought we'd better stick to the subject, which was the white rabbit. Where do you suppose Jedediah went? I asked. He's worse than the rabbit in Alice in Wonderland. Oh, he's over there someplace, she said. He always is. You see that big hedge across the back of his lawn? A tall, private hedge separates Mr. Apple's lot from my mother's. There is another hedge on the opposite side of the Apple's lawn, and one running across behind the garage, joining the two. You mean the hedge at the back of his property? I asked. That isn't the back of his property, she explained. On the other side of that, there's still more lawn. His place goes back almost as far as yours. Most of it's lawn. Mr. Apple spends a lot of time out there, watering it and raking it and taking care of it. Much more time than he does on the lawn up here. Why? I don't know, she replied. He's always plowing up little patches of it with a tractor and then seeding it down again. I wasn't kidding when I said he might be burying bodies. There's lots of room back there. Oh, he's just a fusspot about his lawn, I guess, I said. Anyhow, let's solve one mystery at a time. I'm going to turn Agony loose and see if he can catch that rabbit. The apples aren't going to like it if Agony trespasses on their ground. You mean he'd get sore if a dog walked across his grass? I asked. They get sore if a shadow falls on their ground, she said. I bet a nickel he shoots robins. I don't see anybody around, I said, unfastening the wreath from Agony's collar. Agony's a smart dog. He was off like a flash, sniffing along the ground and turning this way and that. He tracked that rabbit out into the middle of the lawn, made a couple of circles, and disappeared under a spreading yew. The second later he gave voice, and if any rabbit within 5 miles didn't shake in their boots, he must have been deaf. Then we saw a flash of white, and the rabbit went streaking across the lawn in the back of the Apple's house, with Agony close behind, baying like mad. In shorter time than it takes to write this, they disappeared around the far corner of the house. It would probably chase him around the house and back this way, I said. Beagles are supposed to chase rabbits in circles. Let's move up toward the road, Midge suggested. There's a hole up there in the hedge where Jedediah usually goes through when I'm chasing him. He would probably come back that way. We ran along the hedge toward the road. Agony and the rabbit were still out of sight, but as we ran, his baying changed and went a note higher, and he seemed to be even more excited. Then the sound grew louder as he rounded the other corner of the house and came back in our direction. We reached the hole in the hedge that Midge had mentioned and waited. Then we saw a white streak dodging back and forth among the shrubs on the Apple's lawn, heading generally in our direction. I could only half see either Agony or the rabbit because of the hedge. I waited beside the hole, but instead of coming through, they went past, going so fast they were just white streaks. Agony was pounding along about 3 feet in the rear. How he could run so fast and bay so constantly, I'll never know. Suddenly, the white streak made a quick turn and doubled back the way it came, running close along the hedge on the other side. This time, I took no chances. I stuck the net through the hole, and it went by. Whammo! I brought the net down on top of it. Agony was going too fast to stop. He ran smack into the butterfly net, almost knocking it out of my hand. Then he did a double somersault and ended by sliding about 3 feet on his hind end. He got to his feet and came back growling and sputtering. The open end of the net was against the ground, and I was afraid to turn over for fear that the rabbit would get out. I pulled it back, sliding along the ground until it was on our side of the hedge. The net is a homemade one. I guess it was made out of an old curtain. You can't really see through it, and all I could tell was that there was something white inside, and I didn't know which end of the rabbit was which. I was decorated with a couple of deep scratches already from a rabbit and didn't want any more. Go back and find me a board or something, and I'll slide it over the open end of the net, I told Midge. She ran off, and a minute later came back with the top of a peach basket. I laid this flat on the ground and slid the net on top of it. Then I picked up the top, holding the net down tightly around the edges, and carried the whole works back to the barn. Midge opened the top of the rabbit pen, and I dumped it in our prize. As it did, it gave a terrible yowl. "Holy Ned, it's Siegfried!" Midge shouted. I looked, and what we had caught was not a rabbit at all, but a great big white tomcat. He was crouched in the center of the pen, trying to figure out what had happened. He glared at Matilda, our other white rabbit, and his tail began swinging back and forth. That cat was in a rage, and the rabbit was the nearest thing in sight. "I'd better get him out of there," I said. "He might attack the rabbit." "Don't go in after him," Midge warned. "That cat is a holy terror. Just open the door and let him out." Agony hadn't figured out what had happened back by the hedge, and he had stayed behind, sniffing around the ground. I guess he finally got discouraged because at this point he came running up to the rabbit cage. He saw the cat inside and started to growl ferociously. "If I let the cat out, Agony's liable to kill him." "That wouldn't be much of a loss," Midge said. "He's the meanest cat I've ever seen. He kills birds just for the fun of it." I snapped Agony's leash back onto his collar, and we tied him to the corner of the barn again. Then we gave the cat a couple of pokes with a stick through the wire, and he jumped out through the open door. Agony about went crazy trying to get at him, but I guess the cat knew that he was safe. He put his tail up in the air, spat a couple of times, hissed, and then walked off, very dignified, toward the apples. "You're a fine hound," I told Agony. "You disappear around one corner of the house chasing a white rabbit, come around the other one chasing a white cat. I'm ashamed of you." If Agony was ashamed, he didn't show it. He jumped and barked and pulled and tried to get away to go after Siegfried. "I wonder how Jedediah did it," Midge asked. "You know that rabbit's not only smarter than we are, he's smarter than Agony is smarter than Siegfried." I didn't say anything. I was disgusted. Besides, before I had a chance to say anything, a state highway patrolman came driving along. He slammed on his brakes when he saw us, pulled over to the side of the road, and stopped. "Do you know where some people by the name of Apple live?" he asked. "The Apples reside in that French chateau," Midge replied, in a very lofty voice. "And if I were you, I'd have my gun handy. They're dangerous." "Thanks, sis," said the patrolman, and drove on. "Bodies," said Midge. "He does have bodies buried back there. Come on, let's hurry over and watch them dig them up." "Bodies," I snorted, but I went along. When we got to the hedge, Mrs. Apple and the trooper were standing on the side lawn facing the hedge. She was worked up about something and was waving her arms in excitement. "This horrible hound came right on the property here and attacked my poor cat," she said. "Poor Siegfried got away from this beast somehow and went running across the lawn. The thief must have trained his dog, because the dog deliberately chased him right over there by the hedge where this man caught him with a net. Siegfried is a very valuable cat, and I want you to find him right away." "We'll do our best," the trooper said mildly. "I just know this man kidnapped him to sell him someplace," Miss Apple said excitedly. "I read an article about it in a magazine. They steal valuable dogs and cats and then take them away to other cities and sell them." Midge poked me in the back. "She doesn't mean kidnapping, she means catnapping," she said. Then she started slapping her leg and snorting and giggling as though she had said the funniest thing in the world. "Hey, look," I said, pointing. "If you really want to see something funny, there was Siegfried. Where he had been, I don't know, but he was on his way through the hedge from our side. He came out on the other side and started across the lawn toward Mrs. Apple, his tail held high in the air, walking slowly and proudly as though he owned the place, which I guess he does." The trooper saw the cat first. Probably Mrs. Apple was too excited to see anything. "Is that your cat coming over there?" he asked, nodding his head toward Siegfried. Mrs. Apple saw the cat and let out a relieved yell. "Siegfried, darling, you got away," she said. "You poor, poor cat." The trooper had been holding a notebook, which he now folded up and put away. "I'm glad your cat is back, Mrs. Apple," he said, touching his cap. "I'll be on my way now." "I still want you to find the man who stole him," Miss Apple said. "I tell you, I saw it with my own eyes." "Yes, ma'am, we'll do our best," said the trooper. However, he didn't waste any time asking any more questions. Several minutes later, we were back at our barn, and he drove up again. "Would you two know anything about a white cat being kidnapped?" he asked pleasantly. "You mean catnap, don't you?" Midge asked, going off again into gales of laughter. She liked the joke even better than she did over by the hedge. I guess she thinks her jokes are like cheese. They improve with age. The trooper laughed again, but I imagine he was just being polite. "I don't think anybody around here would try to steal a cat except by mistake," I said. "If you mean that big white cat of Mrs. Apple's, nobody would want him," Midge said. "They might shoot him, but steal him, never." "Uh-huh," said the trooper. "Well, anyhow, he's back now."